Aly, you are a licensed social worker, and one of your specialties is helping families deal with various issues, including mental health, addictive behaviors, boundary setting, which I'm sure is super important with all this
Yes.
staying at home, but also healthy communication issues. So I just kind of want to talk to you. You know, one of the concerns that I have is, you know, you're reading about increases in domestic violence arrests. You're reading about
Yes.
increases in, you know, child abuse. And that's all like sad, scary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What can families do now before they get to that point? And like, obviously, this is a brand new situation. Everyone's staying at home so much more time than ever. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do families deal with this?
Yeah, definitely. You bring up a really good point. A lot of experts are, like you said, suggesting that there's going to be an increase in all those things, domestic violence, child abuse, things like that. I think it's kind of twofold, right? One, the family unit, but then when you look at a family unit, you have individuals. We're all individuals that make up a family unit. So I say if you're someone that struggles with, anger management or substance abuse or mental health or all the above, whatever that looks like, that you as an individual really work to get that help that you need. Yes, a lot of the face-to-face places aren't seeing people. That being said, there are plenty of, online groups, plenty of individual therapists still meeting with people via telehealth. So if you are finding yourself really kind of at that point where, oh my goodness, like you kind of hit red, so to speak, meaning that, I'm feeling very triggered. I might act out on, anger that I'm feeling and hurt somebody, or say something that's going to really hurt somebody, that you get that help that you need. And then kind of taking a step back before we get to the worst case scenario, right, where you're at that point, taking some time for yourself. And that is hard because a lot of us are, quarantined, so to speak, together with your family. And it's interesting because maybe a month ago, a lot of people are like, oh man, all I just want is like time with my kids and family and, just have time to reconnect. And now we have that. But I think the big difference is it's not like kind of that vacation feel that people were looking for. It's more of, oh my goodness, we have all these stressors, financial, school, relation now, it's not like a vacation. So I think the big thing I would say is lower your expectations. What I mean by that is, don't expect that everything is going to be, like a picture perfect family. There are going to be things where you guys argue over the remote. You're going to argue over, do you have pizza or spaghetti for dinner? And that is okay. It's what you do with it that makes a difference. So one, I would say having time for yourself, even if that's you wake up 30 minutes or 10 minutes even early and sit outside on the porch and drink a cup of coffee for you time, or if you, take 10 minutes to take a longer shower than you normally would. The other thing I'd say is make sure that as a family that you're spending some time together as a unit, as a family unit. Even again, if that's only a half hour to an hour, watching your guys' favorite TV show. And then kind of going back to the first things that I said in the beginning of, creating a schedule and a routine as a family. Again, going back to, there are plenty of groups, support things that people can go to if they need help. Lastly, there are still shelters open. There are still places that if you are in a situation where domestic violence is happening or you need to get away where it's safe, there are places that you can go and there's resources to find. So you can easily reach out and find those if you're really not safe.
Oh, that is awesome. And it's not all bad. One of my staff, I asked them for questions that ask you things that they wanted to know. And one of my staff is she's 23 and her brother is 26, 27, and he's actually quarantining with her. And they did not get along too much when they were little kids, but now they're spending this quality time together. They're doing video games and they're like bonding in a way they've never bonded. And so so it's not all bad. I know a lot of people are having fun doing this. I know that me personally, it's, when I used to go home and I tried to detach myself. So for the last 3 years, when I arrived home, I was like, I'm not going to do work until my daughter falls asleep because I want to have that quality time. And so when I'm at home, I almost feel this like, it's almost like a short circuit in my thinking, like, wait a second, why am I working? I'm supposed to be with her. And then when I do get into a groove and she interrupts me to ask me 1,000 questions, I feel bad being like, I don't have time for that. And so
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
the boundary setting is very hard for me. That's when I'm at home. And you
Yes.
see this, I'm recording it at my office. Nobody else is here. So it's totally safe. It's quarantine zone 2 for me. But
Yes.
what is some advice about setting those boundaries?
Well, I think, you know, one, I don't want to gloss over the very important part that you brought as far as, oh my goodness, like that line, like I want to be with my family, but also have to work. And then I'd like to segue eventually into talking about people who still actually have to go into work and what, you know, effects that's having on families. But as far as the boundaries go, I think it comes back to, again, that schedule, that routine, you know, that, okay, right now dad is at work. You have your set times, your set hours that you go to work. And then when that's over, you leave your devices, you leave, you know, you turn off even you know, your phone, that maybe it's your work phone. So you're not constantly checking your emails or making those phone calls when you're not technically working anymore, so that you can be with your family. And then while you're working, you know, it's like, okay, now this is your time, honey, like your daughter, so to speak. This is your time to, you know, do your drawing or go play outside, or if she has homework or whatever, doing those things. So again, just like if you would any other day, maintaining as best as you can, this is my work time, and this is, you know, playtime. And if you need to take a little, like an hour lunch break versus a half hour, okay, then you eat lunch and then go play with them for a little bit so they don't feel neglected, and then go back to work.
That's awesome. Just talking to you makes me feel better, because I've been trying to, like, 15 minutes of every hour. Let's go for a quick walk. Let's go do something real quick. And then it seems to keep some of the whining down a little bit. And
Yes.
I just can't even
Yeah.
imagine the stresses a single parent household would have during all this. That's
Oh, yeah.
gotta just be incredible. Any
Yeah.
advice for, I can at least try to hand my daughter off to my wife, and when I am home, we're making this alternate schedule. But if you're a single parent, what advice do you have? Just
I mean, I think it comes back to like being flexible and like, cause and I think, you know, talking to other people, you know, if you're still working, your employer, that they know, you know, a lot of employers have been a lot more flexible right now about, like, it's out of your control. If your kid is school age and they're not at school anymore and you have to work, you're right. That is a lot to balance, and being gracious to yourself that this is hard. Like, this is hard, and acknowledging your children's feelings too. Because, you know, I think we overlook what our kids are going through right now. You know, they just kind of carry on, and they don't understand what a pandemic is most of the time. They don't understand why mom and dad are home. So there's probably going to be an increase in needing attention, needing, you know, maybe even some behaviors that aren't typical for them. And being understanding as a parent, as like, this is hard for them too. This is hard for me as a parent. A child does not have the capacity to kind of process what's happening. So again, being patient, as flexible as possible, and being, you know, forgiving to yourself if you slip up, and maybe, you know, don't say the best thing that you'd want to say as a parent, but, you know, going back and be like, I'm sorry, you know, daddy or mommy didn't mean to say that, and explain what's going on in a kid version way.
That's awesome. And then
Yeah.
one of the things you mentioned, some of the stresses people who actually still have to go into work.
Yes. Yeah.
Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, even speaking as me, like I'm still going into work half the time in my other job, and then coming home, and I have several friends who are nurses as well, or even people that aren't in the medical field, like say even lawnmower repairmen or plumbers, you know, things like that. Where they're kind of underlooked of what they have to do, but you're still having to go into work when everyone else's lives are kind of on hold. Where they're getting to work from home, and you still have to go and kind of put yourself in that danger, and then coming home to your family and fearing that you might infect, you know, your loved ones. You know, that's causing a lot of, you know, stress on people, as far as like, again, like, am I infecting other people that I love, and then having to leave your family if they're home. And feeling maybe a little bit jealous of people who get to stay home with their family and are like, well, they get to stay home, and they're complaining about it. And so, but I mean, each person's struggles are completely valid and understandable. So I think, you know, as far as people that have to go to work and still do that, I think again, it still comes back to giving yourself as much self-care that you can do, you know, following the guidelines, of course, the CDC recommends, you know, washing your hands, you know, taking the showers when you got home from work, things like that, but really working on just letting go of that fear, because there's nothing that fear is going to do. You know, our mind has this thing, if we worry enough about something, it's going to change it. Has it ever changed it? No, it just makes us more miserable and more uncomfortable. So doing our best to do the best that we can, and then as much as we can, letting go of that fear and anxiety.
Absolutely. Aly, what are some strategies that people can use in the home when they recognize, hey, this is getting tense, or I am getting a little, I'm starting to feel very emotional. So basically, you can kind of see your temperature rising at your family. You love them unconditionally, but you know you're trying to get something done, and there's interruptions constantly, and you feel it coming. What are some ways to diffuse the situation?
For sure. So really in that point is taking a break. You know, you need to, even though you can't necessarily go to, you know, someone else's house or go to a store, you can still go on a walk. You can still, you know, get outside, get some fresh air. You know, if you need to go sit in your car and listen to some music, you know, getting away from the situation at that point, if you really feel like, you know, like you said, your temperature is rising, and if someone says, you know, one thing, I'm going to snap, getting away from the situation, to take that breather, take that moment to be, you know, to breathe even and be mindful. And if it keeps happening over and over, you know, seeking a professional to help you come up with some more coping skills, figure out what's the root of what's going on. And then again, going back to that mindfulness, if we can increase mindfulness before it gets to the point that you're to the red, you know, once you're to the point where you're going to explode, there's not much that's going to get you from exploding. So we want to get you using those coping skills that are helpful, whatever is good for you, whether, you know, everyone's is different, music, singing, even dancing, exercising, doing yoga, if that's your thing, deep breathing even is helpful. I mean, taking a moment to reconnect to the breath has been shown by many studies, research studies, that can help reground yourself to the present moment and take that minute to step back so you don't react.
Step back so you don't react. That should be like a trademark. I like that.
I have many slogans that I say, and some people call them funny, but they help me remember, and I feel like they're good ways for mnemonic devices for people to remember things.
That's no, step back so you don't. I like that. And here's something else too. So everyone's spending more time at home. You're spending more time. I'm spending more time with my spouse in the last 3 weeks than, you know, usually I get home at 7:00. We have a family dinner, and then my spouse puts our child to bed around 8:15, 8:30, and then I wake up at 5:00. I'm at the office. So I mean, I see them during the week. On the weekend, you know, I'm Mr. Dad the entire time, but now I'm seeing my spouse more than I've seen her in a very long time, and it's awesome. It's also challenging, but it's people who are in similar situations, such as myself, spending a lot of time with their spouses or even their children. If you see them engaging in behavior that's not healthy, is there any polite way to be like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that? And I mean, Jamie, if you're watching this, I'm not talking about you specifically, but even myself, yesterday at like 3:30, I was in a meeting with a bunch of other attorneys, and everyone was drinking bourbon. So I went and got a big glass of bourbon, and I was sipping on it. And my wife was kind of like, hey, it's 3:00. Is that really time to be drinking bourbon? And at first I was kind of like, I got upset. And then I was kind of like, she's totally right. Like, why am I drinking bourbon at 3:00? But are there some ways that spouses can, or even even if you have older kids, are there gentle ways to be like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that without seeming like you're attacking somebody? There has to be, right?
Oh, for sure. So the first thing I would say, it's all about timing. It's when you do it, because especially if you were struggling, like for you in that instance, that example you gave, you know, it doesn't sound like you struggle with like needing the alcohol. It was kind of more of like a social influence type of thing, kind of more like of a tradition, it sounds like. But say you struggled with like actually having like that need to drink in that moment, you're not going to be receptive to someone like, stop doing that. That's not going to work, right? So it's really about timing. So finding a time when probably the situation is over or before it even starts. So after the event has happened, when things are calmer, and you could say, hey, I'd like to talk to you in the future. When would be a good time? Setting a time that you're going to have that conversation so that you're both ready. And the reason why I say that is you're not going at it emotionally charged. Because if you go at it emotionally charged, there are going to be words and things that you don't really mean and that are very hurtful and are going to just derail your whole point of trying to get them to get help that they need. You're gonna damage the relationship versus building that bridge, so to speak. And then I'd go at it when you do have that conversation when both of, they might not be ready, but at least they're not emotionally charged and you're not emotionally charged. Going with I feel statements, what their behavior doing is affecting you. Because if you're like, well, you do this and you do that, it's accusing. You're accusing them and you're not, saying why it's bothering you. So saying like, when you do this, I feel concerned about your drinking. I care about you. I'd really like to see you not drinking. What can I do to help you? What does that look like? And then if they're not receptive to that, and you've done that multiple times, changing that, what can I do to help you? Setting that boundary of like, if you drink again, this is my boundary, whether that's, you need to go to rehab. Or you cannot see the children, or whatever that might look like for your particular situation. And again, if it gets to that point where you're having to make those boundaries because it keeps happening over and over and bad things are happening, whether, they're becoming angry at you, maybe they've run into legal issues, maybe they are unable to complete their, tasks that they have set for them, that they go to rehab or they get some treatment that they need, because obviously it's to that point where it's gone from dependence to addiction.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, all that, even hearing you say that I feel, what can I do to help? That's so much just easier than to be like, hey, you're an alcoholic. Yeah, so,
The nagging doesn't work, right? It just
no, it
makes
doesn't.
it adds fuel to the flame, and that is the tricky part, especially for loved ones, because you are angry and hurt and upset and scared even, to see that happening. Maybe again, violence is kind of acted out because when someone's under the influence, they're not making the same judgments that they typically would be doing. So it's easy to kind of get that anger lashed out. And I think a lot of times when there's addiction, people focus on the person who's struggling with the addiction versus those who are living with the person with, said addiction. And those are the people too that, they're hurting just as much. They're living with that. They're having to, say it's, wife and their husband is drinking. That relationship is not what it was or how it should be. They're probably having to pull a lot of the weight in the relationship. They're not present. You're not you when you're under the influence. So even if the other person won't get help, the person struggling with the addiction, you yourself, need to get some help to help process what that's like and what you might need to do moving forward to set those boundaries. And, I can't unfortunately give like a cut and dry what that will be because it's different from every person, every relationship.
Aly, what is the best way to contact you?
You're reachable by phone and by email. My email is ally@groffenassociates.com. And my phone number is 317-474-6448, extension 108.